Okay, so let's do an overview of the Sarah Song essay, What Does It Mean to Be an American, to sort of help you navigate what might have been a difficult essay for some of you to read. All right, so this essay does two things. The first thing that it does is it explains why civic solidarity matters, and it also defines what civic solidarity is. The other thing that it does is that it describes three models of civic solidarity. In other words, it is trying to explore what is the best answer to the question, what does it mean to be an American? And these three models provide an understanding of how to answer that question. All right, so let's look at what she means by civic solidarity. What does it mean? And some of you in the discussion did a pretty good job with talking about this. Others seem to struggle a bit. Well, when you think about the word civic and solidarity, you should sort of pull it apart. And let's start with the easier word, solidarity. And sort of think about a baseball metaphor. Big Brewers fan, right? And sometimes we ask ourselves, okay, why is a team good, right? It helps to have good players on a team, but it also helps to have a sense of team solidarity, right? And think about what that means if you've ever played sports before. Sometimes you're on a team and everybody's just looking out for themselves. They're not really playing together as a unified group. Other times you're on a team and it has really strong solidarity, that everybody looks out for themselves. And you don't think about yourself as an individual first, but you sort of think about yourself as a brewer first, right? A member of the crew. And that's what solidarity is. It's the sense of being unified as a group. Civic solidarity isn't like sports team solidarity, but civic solidarity is where you feel that it refers to a political community, okay? And so civics is politics, being a part of a political community. And so when you combine those two words, civic solidarity, it means that you have a sense of group identity within your political community. That you see yourself as an individual, but you also see yourself as an American, and that everybody who is a part of this political community, that you have some sort of bond with them. You have some sort of sense of unity or solidarity with them. And so civic solidarity can be thought about it as a unified body politic. But even put more plainly, it's a sense that we see each other as united into one political community. That regardless of what our race is, our gender, our region, where we live, our level of income, that at the end of this day, we see each other and all of us as Americans. In other words, we sort of have each other's backs. So when you think about that definition of civic solidarity, think back to your discussion post and how you answered whether or not you think that we have civic solidarity in the United States. Some people think that we did, some people think that we didn't, but think about, did you fully understand what civic solidarity meant when you answered that question? So according to Song, civic solidarity is like a necessary component of living in a democratic society. So she talks about civic solidarity because she thinks without civic solidarity, it's hard to live or maintain a democratic society. And so let's look at the reasons why she thinks that. Well, for one thing, she says that democracy demands solidarity, that democracy is government of, for, and by the people. And so because we are the ones who are ultimately doing the governing, okay, that we have to have respect and for in a sense of that we're all in this together, that we are all Americans. We need to have the sense of that that we feel like we're a part of this bigger project. And she says that's important because democracy is really about not just looking out for yourself, but it's actually making decisions that are in the best interests of the group. And so in democracy, you have to have toleration of people whose viewpoints you don't agree with. And it's easier to have toleration for people's viewpoints that you don't agree with if you, at the end of the day, see each other as both being Americans and that you both deserve to be mutually tolerated. We talked earlier in the semester about pluralism, that every group has the right to compete to influence government. But if your group doesn't win, it's not like my way or the highway. It's basically say, you know what, your party won, your group won the election. Your group was able to persuade other Americans that your way was the right way, and we're gonna allow you to respect the fact that you won. And so that civic solidarity allows you to put your interests to the side for the greater good of recognizing that we are all part of this American project. She also says that living in a democracy is not just is about being able to take resources and distribute those to people within a community, particularly those who are in need, those that we need to take the most care of, the vulnerable, maybe the elderly or the sick, those who don't have the skill sets to take care of themselves. And also, some people are just, you don't choose who your parents are. You don't choose the circumstances that you're born into. And so some people have, get inequalities just based on their life chances of the groups that they were born into. If you have civic solidarity, it's a lot easier to allocate those resources. She calls it redistributive justice. And people in the discussion did a fairly good job of sort of pointing that that's what she said, but I felt like that point needed to be developed a little bit more. But redistributive justice is where you raise money as a group and then you redistribute it to those in need. And it's if you don't see the people that are getting the goods, right? Those who are getting help, whether it's welfare or unemployment or health insurance, if you don't see them as all being a part of the American community, it's easier to sort of say they don't deserve it. They don't, they shouldn't get it. And to have a democracy work, we've got to be able to redistribute goods to those who need them. And so civic solidarity helps with that. And then she finally says that there are other ways of unifying the political community, but she thinks those ways are exclusionary, right? So you could unify, and we've seen this historically, you could see that people unify around like a racial identity. What it means to be German, right, is a certain race, or a certain ethnic group or a certain religious group, right? To be truly X, you must be this religion. You can unify around those things, but they're exclusionary, right? That you must follow or be of a certain ethnicity and race to be a part of the community, and not everybody, and you don't have any control over that, right? And also to demand that somebody follows a particular religious edict or theology in order to be a part of a political group, that is very exclusionary. And so civic solidarity, unifying around the sense of a political community, provides a much more open and perhaps stronger sense of unity, since it's perhaps less likely to be a source of conflict. Okay, so we've defined civic solidarity. We have a sense of why it matters. The next thing we need to do, or that she does in her essay, is that we need to find a model for creating and maintaining civic solidarity. And she talks about that you want to have a way of building civic solidarity that's thick enough to provide support for justice, redistribution of goods, fair treatment of everybody, and also strong enough and thick enough so that we have the tools necessary to respect the views of others that are, necessary components of democracy. But we also we don't want it to be so thick that it kind of erodes what it means to live in a democracy, where we sort of move more towards an exclusionary sort of society, which is in many ways anti-democratic. And so you also want, a model that's thin enough to allow for some diversity and respect for diversity. So let's quickly take a look at the three models that she offers. The first model that she looks at is from Habermas, and it's called constitutional patriotism. And I think that a lot of times when we think about what it means to be an American, that I think this is a lot of what people think about. from Habermas's perspective, what it means to be an American, or what it means to be unified into this political community, that what binds us together isn't race, religion, or ethnicity, but what binds us together is an allegiance to shared political ideas and values. In other words, what binds us together is an American creed. Okay, and that to become an American, that every citizen needs to be socialized into this common political culture. What are the basic values that most, if not all, Americans abide by? And so, Habermas says that what it means to be an American is that and really all that it means, right? But it means a lot, is that you must embrace and understand and embrace the ideals and values that we find in our founding documents, right? That we find in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That all men are created equal. They're endowed with their creator with certain unalienable rights. They're endowed in the Constitution, the sense of limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, right? That are found in the Bill of Rights, right? That government is limited in what it can do in order to open up space for people to like fully live their lives in sort of an unharassed and free way. And there are other things that make up the American creed. The Gettysburg Address, Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I had a dream speech," "I have a dream speech," etc. Right? But that's what it means to be an American: to embrace equality, democracy, human rights, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the rule of law. So from Habermas's perspective, we don't need to, it's not, doesn't matter about what country you came from, which races, what language you speak, right? But what matters is, do you understand and do you live out a commitment to the American creed? And if you do, then that means you're an American. So it's a pretty straightforward model that he offers. David Miller offers a different model for answering the question of what it means to be an American. And his model is known as liberal nationalism. Okay. And so nationalism usually has sort of a negative connotation, but liberal it's like small l. Okay. Liberal usually means, recognizing that we need limited government, that we need to have civil and political rights. Okay. And so it's like not this sort of like negative form of nationalism, but it's a more modern form of nationalism. David Miller thinks that Habermas's model doesn't go far enough. He thinks that to have true civic solidarity, you got to go beyond just sharing a creed. But for him, he says that you need to have a creed plus a respect for a particular type of culture, not a political culture, but more of a broader social culture, in order to develop a strong civic solidarity. And so for Miller, what it means to be an American is to embrace the creed, but to be an American, you also need to assimilate yourself to a particular culture. And for him, he sees that culture as being sort of the culture that is from whence our country sprang forth from, right? And we can have lots of, that's probably one of the problems about David Miller is, okay, well, what is the culture, right? And he does talk about a space for sort of how the culture, is it fixed, that it can change over time. But he says, right now that the culture is that we are a deeply religious country, and that's true, right? When you compare our country to like other countries like us, we have a much higher level of people in the United States who believe in God, pray daily, think that it's important to believe in God to be like a good person, right? And so he says that what it means to be American is to sort of, embrace that tradition, respect that tradition. And also what it means to be American is that we separate church and state, that you can worship how you see fit, but religion can't be forced upon you. And so we got to recognize that there's a plurality in religion and respect all forms of religion, but to understand that religion is an important aspect in the United States. Other aspects that what it means to be an American, even though there's not individualism or hard work, and I really saw that coming through in people's discussions posts. A lot of people were talking about how what it means to be an American is to work really hard and not to expect others to solve your problems. And I think David Miller would agree with that, right? That is a part of, we don't find that in our creeds, but we do find that in a general social culture that we have in the United States. And, he would even say that there could be a justification for saying what it means to be an American is to value our cultural heritage and to speak English, to be more assimilated to the broader culture. And so, David Miller's liberal nationalism is a sort of creed plus culture, right? And the debate is, well, is that too thick? Is it too exclusionary, or is that kind of thickness in holding us together necessary in order to actually have a long-lasting democracy? The final model that Sarah Song looks at is Charles Taylor's deep diversity model. Um, from Taylor's perspective, he says the other two models deal with these like first level of diversity. Yes, we have differences, but these differences are submerged underneath either a creed or underneath the creed plus culture, right? That the other models don't really recognize the vast amount of it doesn't recognize and doesn't respect the amount of like true diversity that we have in the United States. So for Taylor, what truly binds people together is recognition that what it means to be an American is different for different groups within the United States. So it's not throwing out creed, right? It's not throwing out culture, but it's saying in our next discussion, we're going to be talking about should our founding fathers be celebrated, right? And you're going to be listening to excerpts from the famous speech that Frederick Douglass gave on July 4th in the 1850s before the Civil War, where people were slaves, and Frederick Douglass was a former slave, right? He had to live in Canada in order to not be brought back to the South, right? He's like, go ahead and celebrate the 4th of July, but what the 4th of July means for me is something entirely different, right? As an African American who used to be a slave. And so, for Charles Taylor kind of gets into that what it means to be an American really plays itself out differently. If you're a European American, if your ancestors are from, Britain, Irish Americans, right? Your experience of America is going to be different than the experiences of African Americans who Irish Americans and made a choice to come here. Now, Irish Americans were discriminated against when they got here in the first waves of immigration, but there was a choice to come here, right? African Americans didn't have a choice, right? They were brought here as a part of the slave trade, and so their experience of what it means to be an American is very different, right? Very different for Asian Americans as well, who were not even regarded as full citizens until, nearly the end of the 19th century, right? And so Charles Taylor is saying that that what it means to be an American is to recognize that there is this diversity, true diversity in terms of how we experience what it means to be an American. Not that it's so diverse that being an American has no meaning, right? But that what it means to be an American is informed by one's ancestral and current lived experience. And so he says it's not like we should be Asian or African American privately and American publicly, right? Subsuming our identities to the private sphere and just being like all Americans in the public sphere. But that what it means to be an American is to be both Asian American or African American or Irish American, both publicly and privately. All have different and distinct ways of belonging to America. And that it's through the recognition of that diversity that really does provide a solidarity that is necessary, particularly in this country that is quite diverse. Okay, so that's what the models, and here are just some critical thinking questions to get you to think about as we we move forward. And like I said, this will reappear on the midterm exam, right? Because it's an important essay. And so in your discussions, I asked you which model do you think best answers the question of what it means to be an American. Since we've kind of gone over this again, that question might appear on the midterm, and I'd expect like maybe a more developed answer to that question. Do you think creed alone is enough to bind us together? Do newcomers to the United States need to embrace creed, but also need to embrace cultural America, English, individual responsibility, love of baseball? And what are some of the advantages of recognizing the distinct ways that racial, ethnic, and class groups experience America? And are there some drawbacks to that? Okay, so hopefully this video has sort of helped deepen your understanding of that essay. And there will be extra credit points that I'm going to have an extra credit point quiz to super incentivize you listening to this video. All right, thanks a lot, and I will talk to you later.